Good morning. Welcome to the Financial Literacy Center's webinar for personal finance journalists. The center is a joint effort of the RAND Corporation, Dartmouth College, and the Wharton School, and is funded by the Social Security Administration. My name is Dan Iannicola, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. By way of background, I came to this issue of financial literacy and the center from my previous role as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Financial Education at the U.S. Department of Treasury. In a moment, you will hear from the center's 3 directors and one of their researchers, and then be permitted to ask them questions. But first, I'd like to take a moment to provide some context. It was spring of 2009, in the wake of the financial meltdown, that the Social Security Administration announced its intent to form a research consortium focused on financial literacy. In October of that year, this center was launched and began its 2-year mission to develop and test innovative concepts to improve financial literacy and promote financial decision-making. In particular, the center's researchers focused on financial literacy topics related to retirement savings and planning. But why look at retirement savings? Because many experts have concluded that an alarming number of Americans are financially unprepared for the retirement that awaits them. Some have referred to this as a savings slump, others call it a challenge, but some have even referred to it as a full-on savings crisis. And unlike the financial crisis that we recently witnessed, this savings crisis doesn't have an immediate impact, nor does it have an obvious urgency. Rather, America's savings crisis is a crisis in slow motion. Every day, many Americans are inching closer to a retirement that they simply aren't ready for. It is against this backdrop that the financial literacy issue has risen in prominence, and that financial literacy is now seen as a potential tool among those who study retirement issues. What does the role or absence, what's the role of financial literacy play? What is the absence or presence of financial knowledge, what does that do for our lives? Can financial literacy be that ounce of prevention that can help us avoid a crisis on the household and macro levels? We'll look at those questions. And to do that, we will move to our first panelist, and that is Mr. Chris Bumcrot. He is the founder of a market research firm called Applied Research and Consulting, LLC. Now I'll turn it to Chris, and he'll be speaking to us about the geography of financial literacy. Chris?
Thank you very much, Dan. We have a great resource for understanding financial literacy in America, and it's called the National Financial Capability Study. And this is a very large-scale survey that was done nationwide. It's large enough that we're actually able to analyze the results for each of the 50 states and the District of Columbia. So we can drill down and take a look at the geography of financial literacy, as Dan said. Now, this survey covered a wide range of topics having to do with what we call financial capability. So we asked questions having to do with whether people are making ends meet. Are they saving money, or are they spending more than they're earning? Are they planning ahead, either for retirement or for emergencies? Are they managing financial products wisely? Are they handling credit cards intelligently, mortgages, and other financial products? And then also, we of course measured their financial knowledge so that we could understand to what degree are people literate about core financial concepts, to what degree are they illiterate. So let's take a look at some geography of financial literacy on this next page. What we did was we asked each of the respondents in the survey a series of 5 fairly basic questions about financial knowledge, questions having to do with interest rates, the effect of inflation, mortgages, and other financial products. And we're able to score everybody in terms of how many of those questions they got right or wrong. Here, what we're showing on this map is an ordering or a ranking of all the 50 states in terms of whether they were in the highest group or the lowest group or somewhere in between in terms of the average financial literacy of the people in that state. So you can take a look here and find your own state and see if it's one of the blue states, that's good news. It's one of the highest financial literacy states. If it's one of the red states, that's bad news, one of the lowest, or anywhere in between. Now, the question this may raise in everybody's mind is, does it really matter whether an individual has high or low financial literacy, whether a state has high or low financial literacy? And it absolutely does. Our research and the research that the other panelists here will be discussing today shows very clearly levels of financial literacy matter a great deal in our everyday lives. People who have higher degrees of financial literacy are more likely to plan for retirement, they're more likely to intelligently manage financial products, and they're also less likely to get into financial trouble using financial products that generate very high fees. Another way of looking at how financial literacy matters is to look at the chart here that shows how the states compare to each other in terms of financial literacy on one axis and the level of poverty on the other axis. And what we found here was that there's a strong connection between the average financial literacy of the people in a state and the overall level of poverty in that state. And you can see in this chart the two extremes that we've pointed out. On the left side of the chart, you have Louisiana, which had the lowest average financial literacy of all the states in the study. And you can see that it has quite a high poverty level, something on the order of 17% of the population. The other extreme is New Hampshire, the highest average financial literacy of all of the states, and it has a considerably lower poverty level. There are other differences. Every state has its own particular characteristics, cultural characteristics, demographic characteristics, and also public policy characteristics that can affect financial literacy and these outcomes that result from it. So you can see here a few examples of states that have extreme conditions compared to other states. Delaware, for example, is the state that we found where the respondents were least likely to be saving, least likely, in other words, to be spending less than they are earning. In Montana, for example, that's a state where people are most likely to use high-fee alternative financing vehicles, such as payday loans or tax fund anticipation loans. What I'd like to do, just in conclusion, is to point you towards a website where you can get these details and a lot more details about your particular state. It's called usfinancialcapability.org. You'll be able to find charts, easy to use, tables and information that will show how your state compares to other states in the country and to the country as a whole in terms of financial literacy and other measures. The other thing I'd like to encourage you to do is to point your readers or listeners to this website where they can take the 5-question financial literacy quiz and see how their score compares to the other people in their state and to people across the country. And with that, I'll turn it back to Dan.
Thank you very much, Chris. Very useful information for us. And just a reminder, everyone who is with us today, we will be taking all of the questions at the end of the presentation, so feel free to form those now, and you can certainly send them in. We will now move to the director of the Financial Literacy Center, and that's Dr. Anna Maria Lusardi. She is the Trust Professor of Economics and Accountancy at the George Washington University, and she will be speaking to us on the importance of financial literacy. Anna?
Thank you very much. I want to start where Chris left to make the statement that the big finding from the survey is that we are basically a country of financially illiterate people. Chris didn't show the question that we have asked to measure financial literacy in this survey, and I have to say both Chris and I were part of the panel that designed this survey and that have looked at the result. But what is surprising about the result of this survey is not that people do not know, but is how little people know. And when we test and look at this basic concept that should be at the basis of the financial decision making, and in fact at the day-to-day management of money, we find that people lack the knowledge of concepts like interest compounding, the working of inflation, and risk diversification. And this, of course, creates some difficulties in understanding and assessing how can indeed people deal with such complex financial market being equipped with such little financial knowledge. To understand and put our finding in perspective, we actually not look at the financial literacy of the US, but very recently perform an international comparison of financial literacy and examine the very same question across as many as 8 countries. And the area span Europe, of course the United States, and Asia. And I have to say, to paraphrase Friedman, is that the world seemed to be flat in financial literacy as well. Across all countries, these 8 countries, we also find low level of financial literacy. This is important because we have experienced a very severe financial crisis. Some of these countries have undergone, for example, privatization of Social Security systems. They are undergoing big pensions changes. And I think what we can infer perhaps from that is that the learning from experience seems to be relatively slow. And I think we have to think about that when we think of financial illiteracy and how can we cure that? Can we just leave it to people to learn from experience? I also have to say that there is one worrisome finding in in the US and also in the other country, when we actually compare people, and we ask them about their self-assessed knowledge or how much they think they know, as we know in other survey, we actually find that people think they know more than they actually do. That's why I want to go back to what Chris said in the survey that he just presented. The financial capability study is actually possible for people to go online and check their own financial knowledge, and actually I really welcome people to do so they can assess how much they know. But even though financial literacy is widespread, it's also important to say that there are some groups which are particularly vulnerable, in particular because they show very low knowledge. And these are very large groups. They include the young, the old, and women. This is, of course, important because, for example, I think it's really important to prepare the new generation for this new world of individual responsibility. At the same time, we have also seen, in particular in the US, a big shift from defined benefit to defined contribution pension, and we'll speak today more about pension. And again, with defined contribution, people are in charge of their financial well-being, they are in charge of making important decisions about savings and about how much to accumulate and also how to accumulate wealth after retirement. So this low financial literacy among the young and among the old is worrisome. It's also worrisome that women are less financially literate than men, but there is one important component about women, which is that women know that they don't know. And I think this fact and this perhaps lack of overconfidence might actually make women particularly suitable for financial education program, and also make them more likely to look for financial education and participate in financial education program. And across countries as well, we see that more women are more likely to participate in financial education program. But why do we care so much about financial literacy? We should care, and as Chris has already mentioned, financial literacy has implication for behavior. In a lot of studies in the US and across country, we can see a strong link between financial literacy and financial behavior. Just to list a few of those important behavior, we see that people who are less financially literate are, for example, less likely to plan for retirement. And in a world of individual responsibility where people are in charge of their financial well-being after retirement, this is really important. It means that financial literacy can be an important tool for making people plan for retirement. We see that people who don't have knowledge shun away from financial market. For example, they are less likely to invest in stock or to diversify their portfolio. And that's also a very important consideration in a moment in which everywhere financial markets are becoming more complex. Even when they invest, people who have lower knowledge, they don't invest as wisely. For example, they are less likely to choose funds with low fees. They are also less likely to well manage their debt and their liabilities. And we see that, for example, people with lower literacy are just more likely to pay higher costs for their credit card, or also choose high-cost method of borrowings. And I would say one of the most important study really for financial literacy is the link between financial literacy and mortgages, the behavior toward mortgages. We saw recently, of course, how much that matter, but also we saw, for example, that people with lower literacy really are less likely to be wise with their mortgages. And again, here the cost can be really high. Study shows that people who are less literate are less likely, for example, to refinance mortgages when interest rates come down. What's the cost of that? With the size of the US market, that extra cost can amount to as much as $100 billion that the consumer are paying more for their mortgages, and that's not minor. Just want to end briefly with some implication for financial education, kind of going back to the group who are more likely to suffer from lack of knowledge. Because we see that the young really display such low level of financial knowledge, I think it's critically important to have financial literacy in school and educate the new generation for this new world in which we live in. But we also see this big change in the pension system, the shift from defined benefit to defined contribution. And I think it's really important to think of financial literacy in the workplace. Work is where people are and where people are making important decisions, and I think providing information in places where it's easy to provide it, where it matters, can be important. And finally, I think it's important to add financial education in what people do, and I would say also make it fun. And one of our partners is Doorways to Dream, and it has added financial literacy into games. And that's another way in which we can, for example, provide financial literacy for the whole population. And I'm happy to discuss this and take more questions, but now let me turn it back to Dan to continue our conversation on these important topics.
Thanks so much, Anna. Very compelling case for the impact of financial literacy or the lack thereof. We'll be moving to our next speaker, but before we do, I want to remind everybody of the tremendous resource that you all have access to, and that is the Financial Literacy Center website. There was a link to that on the media advisory that brought you here, so I would refer you back to that for working papers, briefs on research that is discussed here, and even other research by the center that we're not going to have time to get to today. Moving on to our next speaker, I would like to turn it over now to Olivia S. Mitchell. She's an Associate Director of the Financial Literacy Center. She is also the Executive Director of the Pension Research Council of the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. She'll be speaking to us on a more specific topic and drilling down a bit on pensions and Social Security and what people know and don't know. So I'll now turn it to Dr. Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's a pleasure to be with you today. As we know, in the U.S. and in fact in many countries around the world, Social Security and pensions are really the cornerstones of retirement. And that's why some of our research has focused a great deal on what people know about Social Security and pensions and what they do with that knowledge or sometimes lack of knowledge. So the first study I wanted to mention briefly is one that was a collaborative work with Ari Kaptein, Lisa Schneider, and Matt Greenwald. And here we did a nationwide survey of adults on what they knew or didn't know about Social Security. And the findings were quite disturbing. First of all, there's a very low level of knowledge across the country. Most people got a grade of D or F on the quiz that we gave them. Nevertheless, the expectations they had for Social Security were very high, and they anticipated retiring mostly on these benefits. There's, however, a great deal of lack of confidence in the whole Social Security edifice because we're all very worried about solvency these days. And there's a strong desire for this very trusted institution to provide more information on aspects of retirement saving and retirement adequacy. Let me just drill down quickly with a couple of graphics. Over 64% of the population, when surveyed, says that they're not very well prepared for retirement. And moreover, if you ask them how Social Security works, this is one of the big things they're going to be relying on in old age, they're not very knowledgeable at all. About a quarter are very much in the dark, and even the rest of the folks are not so confident. Then we asked them additional questions about what actually their benefits were likely to be, what the eligibility age was, what they thought the impact of working after claiming might be. And unfortunately, the level of knowledge, again, is very, very low. People tend not to understand the rules and the regulations, and the consequences for retirement decision-making can well be very negative and quite dire. We gave them overall a pretty low score on the objective test of knowledge about Social Security. And unfortunately, half of the population is doing very, very poorly. So there's a lot to be learned in order to make more informed decisions. Not only that, but especially the young folks see Social Security as quite risky. And this is something that is obviously in the public eye right now with the various political candidates talking about what to do, about the entitlement programs. And in order to make retirement more secure, I think we do need to address this risk aspect of Social Security. Let me just turn briefly to pensions, pensions being the form of support that many employers have provided to their older workers. And in some work that I've done with Gary Matola, Steve Utkus, and Timothy Liu, we've looked at the question of who borrows from their 401k plans, because this is increasingly a phenomenon we're seeing emerge, especially after the financial crisis and with so high levels of family insecurity. One of the things we found is that 1 out of 10 loans from a pension plan results in a default. But even more strikingly, 8 out of 10 workers who take a loan and who leave their job with that loan outstanding end up defaulting. And this, I think, again speaks to the question of financial literacy. Do people really understand the risks and rewards when they borrow from themselves, and what the consequences will be if they lose their job? They're going to have to pay back the whole loan immediately or pay a penalty and income tax on the full amount borrowed. We also find that workers who default tend to be the lesser paid, the lower wage workers, people with relatively low wealth, and small balances. So it's that targeted group that are the least financially literate that we believe are at risk. The other thing we find in my next to last slide is that folks with low levels of household wealth are much more likely to default, and also people whose employers permit them to take out multiple loans. Somehow the availability of multiple loans is seen as an inducement or an encouragement to take them. So some of the implications that we have for this set of research projects revolve around how do we help people think more clearly about loans, how do we educate them better, and potentially how do we educate plan sponsors who are designing the environment in which these loans are taken. So in conclusion, the whole area of financial literacy and the main retirement supports in old age, pensions and Social Security, is one of very great interest to us, and I encourage comments and questions during the final period. Let me turn it back to Dan.
Olivia, thank you very much. Some pretty sobering statistics there and some important conclusions. We will now turn to testing of interventions that we've attempted. It sounds like one of the themes we're starting to hear is that the way some people learn about financial literacy outside of some sort of formal program is trial and error. Well, perhaps we can avoid that if we can get people the proper interventions, but how do you know what works? Well, our next speaker, Ari Kaptein, is going to address that. He's the also an associate director of the Financial Literacy Center, and he's also a senior economist at RAND Corporation, and he's going to be speaking on the importance of evaluating what works and what doesn't work in financial education. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Kaptein.
Thank you, Dan. So I don't think I have to say one more time that there is a problem with financial literacy in the American population. And of course, we're not the first one to talk about this. This has been known for a long time. So there's a lot of material out there that tries to educate people. There are courses, there is written material, there is visual material. The question is, though, do we know that that works? Do we really know that these programs have an effect? Do they really improve financial literacy? And that's a question that may seem simpler than it really is. And let me just talk about one example. So let's say that we look at people who take a course in financial concepts. And now after the course, we try to see whether these people actually know more about financial concepts than people who didn't take the course. Well, it doesn't really tell you anything, because probably before they took the course, they already knew more. Probably they're more interested in it. And probably the material in the course may be more targeted towards them than to people who wouldn't take the course, because maybe people who don't take the course are not as interested, they find it more complicated, they really don't want to know as much. So if you want to evaluate material, you have to do this in a systematic way. And the magic term here is a randomized controlled trial. So what I want to do is give you an example of exactly such an experiment. And then at the end, I'll conclude with sort of sketching a somewhat broader picture. So here's what we did. We looked at, with what was a grand term we called 5 steps to planning success. And the 5 concepts that we look at are the concepts that we really feel people should know. People should know about compound interest, about inflation, about tax-preferred vehicles, about employer matches, about 401ks. So what we do is we develop material for these 5 concepts and then show this to a group of what you could call experimental subjects, individuals that we expose to these materials and then see what the effects are. Here's an example of one of these. So the material consisted of 5 videos that we developed and 5 narratives. So the narratives are little stories that are really similar to what we show in the videos. Here's a screenshot of one of the videos. This is about diversification. And so the way it works is we have 2 young people in an informal setting, and they discuss the notion of diversification. So discuss whether or not it's a good idea to invest in your own company, or whether you want to put all your money into one kind of stocks, or whether you want to diversify across different companies. And it's all done in a visually appealing way. So the experimental design then is that we show this to the members of what's called the Random American Life Panel. And so the Random American Life Panel is a population representative internet panel. Population representative means if they don't have internet, we give it to them, we give them a computer, we give them internet access. They're responding to our surveys. We give them surveys about twice a month, and really about a broad range of topics. So in this particular case, what we do is we give them a financial literacy quiz, and we give them that a couple of months before we actually do the intervention. Then after that, over the course of about 3 or 4 weeks, we show most of the people in the panel the educational material. So they'll see videos or they see narratives. And in one case, they will see a video and a narrative. So we make sure that everyone sees the educational material about all 5 basic concepts, except for one group, and that group we call a control group. And they're the ones, and we don't show them anything. So what we do, we go through this, show the material, and then after that, we give them the financial literacy quiz again, and then we want to look at changes over time. So to give you an idea of what the quiz looks like, this is just a graph of the baseline score. So I don't have time to tell you what the exact multiple choice questions were, but you see the different concepts at the bottom. And you see that in some cases at baseline, people are really scoring really well. So if you look at the left part of the graph, you'll see that pretty much everyone gives a right answer. But if you move to the right, you will see that some of these bars are pretty low. And a low bar just means that many people don't know the right answer. So this is the baseline again. So this is what we did a couple of months before we did the actual experiment. Of course, what you're really interested in is, did the experiment make a difference? So did the educational material help to improve knowledge? So what we have here is not the number of people giving the right answer, no, it's the change. It's the improvement in the test scores that we see if we re-administer the test to everyone. So the way this is calculated, it compares people who got the intervention with those people who didn't get it. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the control group, the people who got the financial literacy quiz a while ago and they got it again, you really don't see any improvement. So the fact that you ask it twice really doesn't help. But you do see that, you see all the bars are pointing upward except for one little tiny red bar that's pointing downwards. You see improvement across the board. Not all of it is statistically significant. So the bars that you may want to look at most are the ones that have a little star on top. So the star indicates that there is indeed a statistically significant improvement. So what we see here is that across 4 out of the 5 domains, there is a statistically significant improvement in the score, and the only one that doesn't actually improve significantly is inflation. So what do we learn from this? So first of all, we do find that you can improve financial literacy. Secondly, I haven't shown that. It turns out that in terms of knowledge, the narrative or the video are doing about equally well. It really doesn't make much of a difference. What we have found in the meantime is that the videos are a little more effective in making people more confident, what we call the efficacy part. So people are actually getting more confident once they see the video than when they see the narrative, although in both cases it works. Of course, the other thing that you want to know, does it stick? is it still the case that 6 months later, 8 months later, people still know more? And we have in the meantime re-administered the quiz to everyone in the panel, but we haven't analyzed the data yet, so we'll get to that soon. We have also seen that for inflation it didn't really work very well. So what we have redesigned the video for inflation, we have redesigned the narrative, and we'll be in the field soon and try to see whether the new version is more effective than the other one. So I think there are really two basic take-home messages from this. First of all, you can improve financial literacy if you have the right material. And secondly, perhaps more importantly, you can actually test systematically what material works and what doesn't. And if we want to invest in financial education of the American people, you clearly want to know whether that investment is effective. And this is a context that shows that you can actually do that. Dan?
Very good. Thank you. And for those of you who are new to the field of financial literacy, even broaching the issue of evaluation is unfortunately new ground. So I think it marks an important step on kind of the evolutionary chain of this movement as something worthy of important policy consideration, important investment, when we can ask the tough questions of does it work, and test them in a scientific manner, as Ari had just explained, and then come up with an answer that says that in fact change is possible, but also emphasizing that evaluation must be integral to any effort to make the investment worth it. So thank you to the panelists for their prepared remarks. I now will open it up to questions, and we encourage you to use the function on the software that allow you to interface with us. We have a few questions in the queue already, but I'm sure we'll have time to get to yours. So I'll start the first one, which is sent in from one of our viewers, and it is to Anna. And what this questioner wants to know is, have we seen any difference among any of the studies either you've done or familiar with between those with a low or moderate income and those with low and moderate wealth, the wealth effect versus what's coming in? And then, of course, the other panelists, to the degree you have something responsive to that, feel free to speak after Anna.
This is an important question. I didn't have time to cover all of the difference of financial literacy, but clearly an important dimension in which financial literacy matter is across resources that people have. And it's, in my view, really problematic that financial literacy is indeed very low, for example, among people with low income, low wealth, and low education. And the reason why I say that is we have seen that financial literacy has a lot of implication. And these are the people, for example, that tend to pay higher costs for financial services. So it seems that financial literacy is low where it matters the most and where most saving could be done. This is an important finding. I think these differences across social demographic characteristics are really important. And perhaps this is also where some of the financial education programs should be targeted.
And I know a number of policymakers have come to the same conclusion, that those with the least latitude, the least margin for error, are the ones least equipped to make the right financial decision. So thank you for that. Someone else? Dr. Mitchell?
So if I could add and build on that, there's always a question that gets asked. Yes, we know that people that have low financial literacy also have low wealth. But what's the cause and what's the effect? What's the chicken and what's the egg? And in our efforts, we've been trying from a whole different set of perspectives and using different techniques to try to answer that question. And we do believe that the evidence is very clear that more financial literacy leads in turn to greater planning, to more understanding of the way financial markets work, and that in turn leads to greater wealth rather than the other way around. So that's an important thing to indicate when you're talking about the potential efficacy and the import of financial planning, financial literacy.
We'll take, if there's no other comments on that question, we'll go with another question, and that's for Chris. What, in compiling the statistics, both on the national measure that you did and the state measure, what surprised you and your fellow researchers? What was something that wasn't expected?
I think we were first surprised by, as Anna put it, the low levels of literacy overall. So when we designed the 5-question quiz of financial literacy. We debated internally whether we ought to include some what we thought of as challenging questions that were more complex. Would we need those so that we could better differentiate relatively low and high financial literacy? In the end, we went with what we considered to be 5 quite basic questions. And even though we kept them basic, still the average respondent only was able to get 3 of the 5 correct. And we had a very considerable percentage of people who got 2, 1, or even 0 correct. So I think it was just, again, reminding ourselves of how basic the knowledge is that people need, and how widespread the illiteracy is.
I'll ask Anna to start this and invite others to join in. You mentioned the international view, what other developed economies are doing. How do we stack up, both in knowledge and then also what we're trying? And have any of you seen interventions that look promising that we haven't quite tried yet here?
International comparisons are difficult when, for example, you don't have the same questions, or when there are so many differences across country that is sometimes hard to characterize. What is critically important. To overcome that, what we have done, indeed, we have administered the same question, and we're able to work with national surveys to be able to have a question measuring financial literacy as similar as possible. As a result, I think we were able to pin down a little bit more and understand how countries stack up. So I have to say, the US maybe is put solidly in the middle of those countries, and these are all, of course, developed countries, where we see, for example, country doing better in terms of numeracy or capacity of do calculations. At the same time, for example, in the US, with respect to country, for example, which have a less developed financial market, in particular the stock market, we do see people doing relatively better in the US. But to echo what Chris was saying, the surprising result of this international study as well is, first of all, how similar countries are rather than how different. So the world doesn't seem to be very different in financial literacy. That the US, irrespective, I think, of this developed financial market and these 20 years or more of shift in the pension system and changes in the pension system, doesn't seem to show people who are more financially literate or more skilled in even basic financial concept. Our understanding of what happened in other countries, and many of these programs are still in action, is that seems to me other countries are more proactive than the US in implementing programs and, for example, in implementing big programs. And they have also started earlier. I think given this shift toward individual responsibility, it seems very important, I think, for the US as well to take a proactive approach. One of the lessons we have learned from this international comparison is if you leave it to the individual to learn from experience, I think it might take a very long time.
Can I, please? So let me just make 2 additional comments. So one is that, of course, the countries differ in the institution they have. So in some countries, one invests perhaps more in taking the decision away from the individual than in education, than in financial education. So in some countries, it's less crucial to be financially literate than in other countries. And I think the US is a country where, as an example, where it's very important to be financially literate. So that's where it's more crucial than some other countries. There is a group of countries where it's probably even more important, and these are the developing countries. And there is a global concern about the lack of financial literacy, what people are going to do, are hardly literate, who live in a country that's changing quickly, where the banking system is either absent or changing quickly, and they have to make complex decisions in an environment that's new and where they have very little training. So we are involved, for example, in a project with the World Bank that evaluates financial literacy programs around the world, because you really see that everywhere policymakers are alert to the fact that this is an important thing to work on. And there's just a lot of work to be done, particularly in these contexts, even more, I would say, than in the United States.
And that's what I've heard from some of my colleagues abroad, and the fact that there's no generational knowledge to pass on because things have changed so much from generation to generation. Very good. We have a question about youth financial education in schools, and we've talked a lot about how to reach out to adults, but certainly one of the obvious targets is the youth, because they're going to use their financial knowledge, we hope, longer, and we can get to them a little more easily. So I know some of you have focused on the youth issue and what you found, but I'll ask if you want to speak. I'll open it up to anyone if you want to speak to the issue of financial literacy in public schools and what approach that we should take to that, or if you just have any data that can speak to the question in general on where our youth are on financial literacy.
Sure, I can start. My research with Anna and other people has found that in the U.S. over time there has been a pattern where some states have actually mandated high school financial literacy programs, whereas others haven't. And so what you can do is follow the young people that go through the states at the time that the mandate is in place. And then what we've been able to do is track them afterwards and ask the question, are the kids that grew up in the states with the financial literacy mandate in fact more knowledgeable, and do they save more, and do they plan more as a result? And the evidence seems to be pretty clear. In states that have the mandates, where they've actually put some support behind the mandates, in other words, funded them relatively well, you find that those young people are more knowledgeable, better equipped, and save more than in the states where they did not. So it seems like that's a very important place to try to insert some additional knowledge. In our experience, it's also true that the value added of the financial literacy is the greatest when you have kids growing up in families where the parents are not particularly knowledgeable, so that there can be some remedial education, if you will, which would be very critical for the lower wage, less educated kids in lower wage backgrounds. So it can be absolutely critical.
I want to continue on that and also mention that the OECD as well is now doing an important project of evaluating financial knowledge among 15 years old and adding a new financial literacy module which will become available in 2012. And I have to say we have already designed the question for this module. It's interesting because the way in which the OECD is phrasing financial literacy in school is really testing whether young people can live in this modern world. And I think it really highlights, in my view, what financial literacy is. Financial literacy today is like reading and writing. It's this essential skill without which you can't really live in a modern world. You can't be a citizen in society. And in a moment of financial crisis, in a moment in which we have this very important and difficult policy discussion about debt limit or about reduction of the deficit, is also critically important to be financially literate, to be a good citizen. But I also would like to say, really from a practical point of view, I think it's critically important to have financial literacy in school, because we do want people to be literate before they engage in important decisions, not after. And think of our young people, what they have to do today. For example, they have to make one of the most important decisions, I think, in their lifetime, which is whether or not to invest in education. Mm-hmm. And we want them to really be well equipped to make this decision. We also know that they are actually making very important decisions right away, for example, about debt and how they are going to finance their education. And again, I think it's critically important to reach this important group while at school. And I think in terms of implementation, I want to echo the finding that Olivia described, which is, it's not enough to just mandate financial education in a state. We have to be willing to also train the teacher to teach this course in school. And we have to be able to do more than provide a small course in your senior year. financial literacy is like every other course. It really builds upon what you have learned before. And I want to remind you, as in literature, we don't teach literature so that people go on to write War and Peace, but we teach literature because they can appreciate a good book. And for financial literacy, it's the same. We want people to be equipped to be able to make good decisions and to be able to understand what they don't know so they can ask for help.
And to echo that is tremendous insights there. We know everyone who graduates from high school is not going to be an author, a scientist, or a mathematician. They get English, math, and science every year. But we do know each one will be a consumer, will be a taxpayer, and as to your other point, a voter. So they can more credibly evaluate some of the things they hear, what spin and what economically makes sense from potential leaders. So thanks for the good discussion on youth. That's an important topic that this field is progressing with, and as Olivia mentioned, there are a growing number of mandates, growing slowly. Some are meatier than others, and some are backed by their states better than others, and it's great to see some early results from those policy interventions, and hopefully that'll spur more, speaking on my own behalf. Now let's move to another question, another issue entirely, looking at government policy with respect to savings initiatives. And I think just about everybody at the table is qualified to jump in on this, so I'll leave it open. But let me ask the specific question. How effective are government savings incentives, for example, the U.S. Savers Credit, and what, if anything, should be done to make incentives such as that more effective? Has any of our research or experience here shed any light on that issue? I'll open it up.
I can
Please.
Start and make a first comment, not necessarily specifically about this incentive. I think traditionally the way economists think about it, and we're all economists, so we all share the blame, is that we think of this in terms of financial incentives. We think that everyone understands incentives. Therefore, if we have the incentives right, then everything is going to be well. And of course, one of the things you have learned is that if people are not literate, they don't understand the incentives, then of course it also means they're not going to take advantage. And for example, the experiment that I just talked about, one of the elements is to take advantage of employer matches if you have a 401k plan. And it turns out that many people don't know how to do that. They don't actually realize that they're leaving money on the table if they don't take maximal advantage of an employer match. So clearly there is more than just putting in place the right financial incentives. There is the aspect of teaching them, explaining it to them. And moreover, it's not just a matter of explaining to them and then say, well, once I've explained it to you, now you know what to do. We also know that the way you tell the story makes a difference. In joint work that Olivia and Jeff Brown and I have done on when people claim Social Security, we have shown that the way you explain the choice has an enormous effect on when people claim. And that's perhaps one of the most important financial decisions that people ever make. Because once you have claimed, once you have stopped working, that pretty much is your income after that, next to other sort of income you may have. So we know that it's not just a financial incentive, it's not just the way it's not just explaining it to them, it's also how you explain it. And you really have to target and know that there are different groups that have different levels of understanding. And one of the things we find in the example of the Social Security claim, for example, is that people are more financially literate, understand it better, are less influenced by the story you tell. If they're less financially literate, they just need more help. So I think if you think of government policies, it has to be a package. The financial incentive is important, but it's only part of the story.
Very good. Olivia?
If I could just add to that, which I think is absolutely right on, the other piece of the puzzle we're now beginning to understand is to help people with execution. In other words, you could be told that you should save for retirement. You could be advised that you should diversify. You can have all this knowledge, but it still might be difficult to put it into practice. And so another piece of the puzzle that we're looking at is how can we help people formulate the plans and then execute the plans. For some people it might be find a financial advisor that can help you do it. For some people it might be just taking notes and putting it in the calendar so you actually execute on the right day in the right place. I tend to forget my PIN number all the time, so I can never remember what it is when I'm supposed to go log on and do something online. But so this is the real world that we live in, and part of our research is trying to figure out what the obstacles are, moving from lack of literacy to execution, and that's what we're doing in our work.
And I want to just continue on that and just add a small suggestion, but an important one, which is make it simple.
Very good, very good. This raises another question, and we're close to touching on it here. Those who have, and I'm sure on this call we have folks who are new to financial literacy, but we did focus on personal finance, so most of you are experienced hands, I'm sure, and you probably have read and perhaps even written about the idea of defaults. Can we just set up things, kind of the idea of soft paternalism steering people to a decision that if they don't opt out, they'll be better off than if they did nothing. I'm going to throw that as just a conceptual issue to each one of our panelists and see if they have any response and any examples they want to give about how that works, what its implications are for the financial literacy field. So I will start with our center director. Anna, what can you tell us about defaults?
I think defaults are critically important. Continuing on what we said before, it's the best way to make things simple, to take the decision away and make it, automatic. So I think this is a great way in which we can improve saving, in which we can improve whether people are not enrolled into their retirement pension. But defaults are not enough, and we shouldn't think of default as an alternative to financial education. In financial education and default options are complement. I think they don't work well without each other. So in the same way in which you probably couldn't have, the success rate of defaults with financial education. So I think actually defaults are not successful without financial education. Why do I say that? For example, we know that these one-size-fits-all policy are not very effective. And so we might default everybody into a 401k, but in fact, if you have a lot of debt, it might be better for you first to pay off debt and then be enrolled in a 401k. People are making many financial decisions, and sometimes being in a pension is not their best decisions. And financial education can actually, I think, help people make the best of default options. So I think, default is a really good example on how you could really complement and how you can use useful, in a sense, incentive and choice architecture to actually help people make decisions, but they are a complement, not a substitute to financial education.
Very good. I'll move it to Olivia, and maybe to make sure everyone is along for the ride, if you can give an example. I immediately thought of default enrollment, but when you're sitting at the table, I'm not going to bother explaining that concept. We've got an ace, so please.
Thank you. Certainly the concept of defaults has become very, very popular in the 401k defined contribution environment. So now most of the large employers have automatic enrollment. When you join a company, you're automatically enrolled unless you opt out. But the evidence shows that contribution participation doubles at least when you do have automatic enrollment. Some firms have also tried automatic escalation, the notion being when you enroll, you put in 2 or 3% of your salary, but every year thereafter, put in your raise, for example. And I've found over my career that that's the most effective way to end up with some money in your retirement account. If you don't see it, you don't spend it, you don't miss it, it's very, very effective. And then, of course, the target date funds have become de rigueur. They're the standard default mechanism for many 401k plans. And the target date funds basically put you into a blended portfolio, which is riskier when you're young, moves you into a safer portfolio when you're old. And that also has proven very effective at getting people potentially higher returns with lower risk, from what we can tell. The only catch, though, is that the defaults, as was pointed out, are not necessarily good for all people at all times. There's also a tremendous variety of target date plans out there. As we saw during the market crash, some people in a target date fund lost a lot of money, even if they were right on the verge of retirement, whereas others were quite well protected. And so even the notion of a default tends to be much more complicated. That's why we have to educate people to be able to look beyond just the first decision and see what in fact is inside the plan they're defaulting into.
Very good. Please.
Yeah, so part I want to echo what both Anna and Olivia said. So the one size fits all clearly is not what you want at the end of the day. So the next frontier, you might say, in this research is really to figure out how to set defaults that are more custom made, that are more suitable for a particular individual. I think generally you would think probably saving too much is less of a problem than saving too little, so you can try to be on the safe side a little bit. So you can start there, but I think you still want to think more about what's the right default. And that's then when financial literacy comes back into the picture, because you need to have a conversation with the individuals about what's suitable for them. And you can still help them and make it simple, but at the end of the day, people have to be able to understand at least the basics of their own situation and what their own goals are. Otherwise, you're going to do something that is just not going to be good for everyone.
And I would emphasize the role that all of you can play in this. I'm sure you realize it, but this is why we targeted you today instead of going directly to the public. These concepts are complex, and they need to be refined in order to be usable for individuals. And so we know that's what you do on a regular basis, and studies show that people go to websites, newspapers, TV and radio to get financial advice, and of course they need to hear it several times. So we thought this was a good way to make our research have a bigger impact by going to folks who can deliver it nationwide on a individual consumer household level. So we hope you take advantage of that. We'll move on to another question now, and I'll give you the question. I think what it may go to is an issue of trust, of consumers trusting the source of the financial literacy information. That strikes me as the closest research question I can divine out of this. Here's the question. Is there any evidence that the funding of financial literacy plans, by this I think they mean programs, matter? Do students or adults acquire more knowledge from independently funded initiatives or initiatives funded by the financial services sector, or does it not matter? I know in my anecdotal experience working with program providers across the country that there is a trust issue. Sometimes consumers seem to think you can either teach to me or sell to me, but not both at the same time. Do we have any research that speaks to that broader issue or perhaps the specific question raised?
Well, let me just mention one tidbit, and I'm not sure about the exact details. RAND has done a study a couple of years ago about whether people understand the difference between advisors, so whether they actually understand the difference between an independent advisor and someone who has a financial interest. And I think the main conclusion is that most people are actually not really able to make a distinction. So I think on the one hand, I'm sure it's true, there is a difference in the amount of trust that people put in the advice. But I think the bigger problem is that many people may be too trustful, because they may be too trusting, they may not actually be able to make a distinction. So I think there is a real issue there in making that clear.
We'll turn to Chris.
I'd like to echo what Ari is saying. We've done focus groups with investors, and we've talked about this issue. And what we found is, for the most part, even though investors claim to be skeptical of people who are selling to them, in practice, if they go to a website, especially if it's attached to a reputable name of a financial services provider, and if they find material there that is represented as educational material, and if they are able to understand that material, they're going to tend to trust it. They'll believe in it. They will use that and think that it's as good as something that would come from a non-profit or a government source.
I just want to bring some of the international evidence to play here. And I have to say, I think it's critically important to have a website that people can go to get financial information. If you think, for example, of other topic like health, you know, if you have a certain disease, I think people know where to go to get that type of information. And I think we need to design the same for financial literacy so that people really know where to go to get reputable, independent, and rigorous source of information. To that respect, I want to mention the experience of New Zealand, which has probably built one of the most effective websites at the national level. And when I say effective, it seems that as many as 1/3 of the population in New Zealand, granted it's a small country, but have used this website to gain financial information. And you know, it's a very well done website that really understands, I think, what is critically important, and also understand that it's important to make it simple, it's important to communicate in an effective way. So for example, they use a lot of videos, they use a lot of stories to explain concept. And at the same time, they are an independent institution. It's done by the Retirement Commission. And I think is perhaps one example to consider when we are really thinking of what can we do also at the national level to make it easy for people to actually access solid, rigorous, and independent information.
Very good. I'll jump to Olivia, but on the national website front, we had a similar experience when I was the Treasury and we launched the My Money website. We had independence going for us, but of course there's the whole marketing muscle. You have to spend the money and the resources to have people know it's even there, as we talked about before. So that site has grown in time and hopefully can achieve the level of saturation that the Get Sorted site has done in New Zealand. But the independence factor, I think, for some individuals seems to be important. It's interesting what Chris mentioned. I'd be curious if those individuals have a higher level of knowledge than someone who doesn't know what annuity is to begin with, I guess is the question. We've sometimes found that people need a certain level of on-ramp knowledge before they even want to sit down and talk with an advisor. I think Olivia wanted to jump in on.
So a couple points. This issue about transparency regarding fees and whose side you're on and so forth is a very hot topic in Washington right now, and in fact across the country, because the U.S. Labor Department is becoming very involved in the diffusion of information about 401k fees, who's getting paid, under what circumstances, and so forth. And it is very important. There was a study done at Wharton, among other places, where they showed some of the MBA students the fees associated with different funds. And they also showed them the returns, and they also, in some cases, showed them the name brands of the funds. And you might expect that savvy MBA students would focus on fees because, after all, over a long history of investment, fees are going to make a big difference. But in fact, they tended to be much more likely to focus on returns and the name brand. And so there's a lot of financial education we could do at that level as well. So that's a very important component of the discussion.
Very good. And we have another question I'd like to turn our attention to. And it involves kind of I'll say a newish intervention. It's similar to counseling, but is I would say a newer, better version of typical counseling on issues. The specific question is to follow up on what Olivia Mitchell said about getting people to act on knowledge. Do you believe financial coaching is a valuable supplement to financial literacy efforts? Should it be included more routinely? Thank you. And the folks I've talked to before and the experience I've had with coaching is it really helps put a human face and gives a better interaction than to just give someone a passive website or a book or a lecture, etc. Do you have any insights on that or any of the other panelists?
Well, surely the issue starts with how much money the person has to play with or to invest if we're not playing. And the problem is that the market is focused primarily on the high net worth population. So the financial advisors are very keen to work with individuals who are relatively wealthy, who have a lot of investable assets. The crying need, however, is for people in the middle market because they may not have the assets that make it worth the while of a financial advisor to drill down deep. And then even people at the bottom of the wealth distribution, as we know, have a great need for advice around things like when to claim Social Security benefits and so on. I think the big challenge of the next decade is going to be to find ways to provide advice and counseling and coaching on the internet in the context that people are willing to trust and provide financial information without too much privacy concerns. Because there's the potential for some making this automatic, some automation of the advice without needing the in-depth financial introspection that you would get from a face-to-face financial counselor. But making it cost-effective and private, I think that's the challenge.
I think there's been some research in the credit counseling field to show some early indications for that, and I don't know if it's generational, but certainly people are very comfortable with being able to, at home, in comfortable clothing, sit down at the web and have a chat with someone. Also, they get to be a little more anonymous that way, and they don't have to walk into some place where they might feel stigmatized. So I think that has a lot of potential. Would you like to speak to the coaching issue?
There's been quite a bit of research now done on the counseling, and we have mixed results. But I want to echo what Olivia said, that on the one hand, I think perhaps coaching might be ideal for certain targets group. And actually, I would argue perhaps among the low income and the low education population, this is maybe where the counseling and the coaching can be more important. Because I think it's hard for somebody who doesn't have maybe the basis or the financial literacy basis to really use the technology or to be confident in using the technology. And I think in some cases for some demographic group, this is an important topic, and the coaching might actually get to what I think is critically important, which is the knowledge plus the implementation. And I think that's perhaps is where the technology might not give us perhaps enough recommendation, which is it might make us knowledge, but then what's the next step, which is what to do. So this can be important. At the same time, I also want to say, there are things that are very similar among us for financial knowledge or for financial decision making, so that we don't really need, we are special, but perhaps not so different that certain program cannot be standardized. And that's where I think the big advantages of technology can really come from. But let me also end with this note, which is critically important for financial advice, which is everybody wants it, but nobody is willing to pay for it. And we need to solve that issue, to really be able to think of how to address this role for kind of advice and coaching.
Very good. And with that, we are running out of time, so I'll thank our panelists for raising some great questions and giving us some good answers. This is obviously a work in progress. I like to say financial literacy is a field in its adolescence. It's not new anymore, but it's not mature yet either, and I think that the work of the center is helping to bring it to maturation. 3 housekeeping points to mention. One more plug for the website. You see the link for that on the media advisory. Please go back to it. In the next few weeks, certainly by early October, we'll be seeing some new additions to the materials there. You will see this webcast will be posted there and archived for any of your colleagues who might have missed it, and that will occur as of September 16th. And I guess the last point of order is just to point you to the media advisory, which gives you an email to reach out if you want to try to set up individual interviews with any members of the center, including the members of our panel here today. So thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to being of service to you and the cause of financial literacy in the future. Thank you.